In this video, we're going to learn how to make a few different types of snow bases using a few different materials. We have epoxy sculpt, we have some Sculpey, and we have some thick cork. We've even got some dried foliage, some skulls. So we're going to make a few of these bases, and we're even going to do some painting so that we can see how we get this effect on the snow itself. I've got a few examples here. One of a Sculpey base. Can't see much because of all the flex paste and oxide paste on top of the Sculpey, but the main body of this is carved Sculpey. A smaller version, again with Sculpey and covered in this case, oxide paste. And we've got some cork covered in the oxide paste. Even have a miniature here. This used to be part of the I-Core line. But again, that it just sets a nice theme for the miniature. In this case, it's a cork base. It's in the same type of cork as this. And I have an example here of this base was cast by Cool Mini or Not. It's part of their Groundworks line. I think you'll recognize that. That's this base. This base was originally sculpted using epoxy sculpt. So we're going to try out a few of these materials, the cork, the Sculpey, the epoxy sculpt. We'll see how this dry foliage works out, the oxide paste, the flex paste, and the secret weapon powders that we'll use to create the snow on the bases. The first material that I'm going to talk about is a two-part clay. It's called epoxy sculpt. There's several different places you can get this. I got this on Amazon. It's not incredibly expensive. Again, two-part clay, much like milliput, green stuff, but this has some unique properties that we'll see as we use it. Got some tin foil here. You'll see how this plays out as we make the base. This serves as an armature. And then we've got some basic sculpting tools. This one with the flat edge, some of the few different points on it. Yeah, this is my favorite sculpting tools. It's just really nice for getting that rock texture. So the next material we're going to talk about is our Sculpey. Our next material is Sculpey. This is a clay that you bake. You can bake it in a normal oven. This is my standard thickness of Sculpey that I roll out using a pasta machine / clay extruder. You can see this is pretty narrow. So for these bases, I tend to roll it out in thicker sheets. These have to be rolled by hand, but you can see the difference in thickness here. And I even have some really thick sheets like this. And these are perfect for creating a base like this. Now the next material that we're going to talk about is cork. have a few different kinds. This is standard cork, like this. This is used underneath pots so that the water doesn't leak out and damage, say, the wooden surface of a desk. So I have this round edge. So it's relatively thin. You can see you can stack it to make it thicker. And then there's also this type of cork. This is more for bulletin boards. You can see it has a much thicker grain to it. Also breaks very easily, and when it's broken, you can see it makes a very nice rocky texture. Very different from the tight grain of our other cork. Now the last material that we'll need, and I'm going to discuss this, are our oxide paste and our flex paste. This is another important material for our bases. This is made by Vallejo. It's called oxide paste. And this is a pretty large container. It's 200 milliliters. It comes in a container, a much smaller one, maybe a third the size of this, if you don't think you're going to use very much. This I use all the time, especially for my terrain projects. So that's why I've got a nice big container. But you can see how I've used it. This is how I've created my snow. Now I use this. You can see it has a little bit of a texture to it. I used to use strictly flex paste for this because it was very smooth. I realized, well, it's actually a little bit too smooth. So I would actually put texture on the snow by using snow flock. Now that was one extra step, so that, well, if I could eliminate that, and then I did by taking the oxide paste and then using some weathering powders mixed with another material to kind of fill in some of the texture in places, but yet leave some in others. So you can see here is a little more texture, but here we have some of the melted, icy overhangs. Well, it's a little bit shinier. And you can see that texture's filled in a little bit, and that's where the powders come in handy. It lets you control how much of this texture you want to show or not. I found it was faster to get rid of some of the texture in places than to try and add some of that texture. Now, another material that'll be very handy to create, see how we've got the snow here. This is by Woodland Scenics. It's called Flex Paste. You can see this is a pretty large container here. This is essentially an acrylic gesso. Yeah, you can take it on your brush, and I applied it to my dried foliage. And you can even paint the flex paste too. It's not just straight out of the jar. You can even mix the flex paste with your paint and paint that way. There's just any which way you want to do it. But again, this is yet another material that's pretty handy. And the last material that I want to talk about is going to be some of the powders that I used to make this, and show you some of the dried foliage. Got another set of materials to discuss. First off, we've got a clump of dried foliage. You get this at just about any craft store. There are dozens and dozens of kinds of this dried foliage. They have a little different properties. Now this one has no coloration to it. There's no dye on this. And I learned the hard way. The dried foliage, which is dyed a color, especially a very distinct color, say red or whatever, it can have a little bit of a smell to it. I bought some red foliage about 10 years ago that when you get close to the clump you can still smell it. Now this again has no dye, so there's no smell. The nice thing about the clump, this foliage, you can just break it off. You can save these little dried flowers on the end if you wanted to, or you can see you've got some of these with no flowers on the end, and that's what we used to create this. And finally, as I discussed, what we did here for snow, some products from Secret Weapon. You have some weathering powders, a white, the faded blue, and the patina blue. So we have these three that I mixed together in different combinations. And this is the last little element that makes all that work. And this is realistic water. This is one of the bigger containers from Secret Weapon. What you do is you mix this with powders, and that allows you to paint that onto your base. And depending on how much of the realistic water you use, you're going to have a little less texture because it'll be nice and smooth, and see, it's got a little more gloss to it, and it's nice and solid. It also secures your powders in place. So one last thing we're going to discuss, and that's the tools to carve your Sculpey, and then we'll be ready to make some bases. Here we have some of the tools that I use to carve the Sculpey. This is not as many as I would use, say, for a typical Sculpey base. And the reason for that is it's kind of obvious that a good portion of our Sculpey actually gets covered by the oxide paste and or flex paste. Normally I'd have, about 5 or 6 of these tools. But again, since so much of the texture would be covered up anyway, we don't have to get too fancy. This, obviously, X-Acto knife is very important, and I just have one of my little hook tools, as I like to call it. And I'm not even going to use the scribe tool in this one because, again, it's not all about carving so much texture into the Sculpey. It's just using the Sculpey to set up the oxide paste. And if you ask, well, why use the Sculpey? Well, the Sculpey, obviously, it's a very tough material. We have a very heavy miniature, a large miniature. This cork, I say that's a little bit flexible. Even this cork, a little bit flexible. Maybe even break it. The Sculpey, very solid. You're not going to break this. You could have really large creature stand on this, get the pins all the way through, and not have an issue. So that's one of the reasons why I use the Sculpey. And now that we've talked about tools and everything else, I think it's time that we start making some bases. Okay, we have everything out on the table to make the epoxy sculpt base. Now I'm going to do this, I think, a simpler one-level base, but still, again, using these materials are epoxy sculpt, sorry. And got a few rocks to create some texture. You can do that, or you can sculpt it with these tools as well. You might even try a little bit of each. And we've got our tin foil. We've got a base here. What I like to do is put a refrigerator magnet on the bottom, a piece of sheet metal here, and you can see it stays on there pretty well. That's very handy, especially with a softer base like this, where we're using the epoxy sculpt so that our fingers aren't getting in there and damaging it. So we can hold it here and work on the top and not have to be hanging on to the sides. I also have some water because we're going to need this to help mix this material together, keep the rocks from sticking to it and the tools. So you always want to have some water nearby. So the first thing I'm going to do is mix some of this together. See, I'm almost out of one of my containers. Fortunately, I have several containers. Now what I'm going to do is put this out for you to see. So there's your part A. Let's get some part B. And this you have to mix 50-50. There's some materials like green stuff where you can go more blue or more yellow. These have got to be 50-50. See, there's really not a whole lot of difference in the color of these. It's, again, not like green stuff where it's pretty obvious which one is which. Here, not so much. And I can tell you, once these two are mixed together, they're going to look an awful lot like your part B. So you really want to keep these closed up and out of the way. So let's get these two mixed together. Now, along with your water, you're going to want to have paper towel, because this can get a little bit on the messy side. So we're going to vigorously, see, I'm going to see how this is cracking here. That's a sign that it's not quite mixed together. It's a little bit harder to see this material than it is the green stuff. It's fairly obvious if you've got streaks of yellow in your green stuff or streaks of blue. This material not quite so obvious. Now as I keep mixing, as you can see, there's less cracking in the material. That means that we've got it mixed together pretty well. I can see there's a little bit of a white sliminess to this. That's one of the properties of the epoxy sculpt. Now the advantage is, I got a fingerprint there, take some water, and fingerprint is gone. A little harder to do that with green stuff. But we're going to take this, and we're going to put this aside. I'm going to make my hands a little bit. Now we've got to take this and create a little bit of an armature for the epoxy sculpt. Now there's a few ways to think of this. You can think of this very loosely, so it's not very terribly densely packed together. Now one of the reasons I like to have it really packed together tight, like this, so if I need to have a miniature stand on this, see my pin here, well guess what, it's strong enough to hold that. This is not going to be, there's nowhere for the glue to hold. The whole idea of using this tin foil is to use a little less of the epoxy sculpt. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to take this and spread it out on our base here. Gonna glue it down. Using some thick super glue. It's almost like a gel. That I find just works so much better for basing. And some of your thinner glues like this. This is fine for some things. I actually keep this around because there's specific uses I have for the thinner glue. But when you're dealing with things like the cork and the Sculpey, those are very absorbent. And this tends to give you a little better hold. So now as that kind of grips itself, what we're going to do is make another smaller base. Again, same thing. What's nice about the tin foil is that if I need to, I can make another layer. So, smash this down. Get ready, glue it down. And as the glue sets on this base, I'm going to put some epoxy sculpt on here. So again, as soon as you see this crack, you see this, that means it needs a little bit of water. So let's create almost a little bit of a sheet. Epoxy sculpt. I'm going to set it down on top of tin foil, and we've got to make sure that it covers all the tin foil. And once all the tin foil is covered, and so we've got some water on top so that nothing sticks to it. That's where we can take our rocks. What we're going to do is basically just press in some texture. Now these rocks are a little more like granite. This is a little more like slate. What I'm going to do is use a slightly different texture now. I'm going to try and use this part of the rock texture right here. See how it kind of fits in there? I'm going to press. I'm going to rotate the rock like so. So you've got, it's made this impression. I'm going to do the same thing. And then rotate. Maybe I want to vary this a little bit. So let's go with this. Press, rotate, press, on the top, press down a few times. Take this, press, and rotate. Sometimes you can go texture on top of texture. Press, rotate. Now let's say we wanted to make this a little more interesting, put a bit of a fissure in there. Well, let's almost use this like a cutting tool, and let's go like this. So now we have two distinct sections. So you can see how you can manipulate the epoxy sculpt. That's the nice thing about it, is that it's not going to cure right away. Actually, it's got a very interesting curing time. because even after it's mostly cured, you can still work this. That's what I like. Unlike green stuff, that at a certain point you're just stuck. It's not gonna, you're not gonna be able to do anything else with it. So, what if we wanted to? There we go. Make another fissure on this side. And we can use our tools here to put some final pieces on this. I'm going to kind of scrape some of this away. I can even put another smaller rock piece out here. Again, you have enough time here, well, especially if you're just doing one base, to add and subtract. But again, realizing that a good portion of this will still be covered by your oxide paste. Alright, I'm going to make this maybe a little less round. Sometimes I'll dip the rock right in to the water. Sometimes I'll go the other way. We've got ourselves our other armature spread out epoxy sculpt sheet again over the top and cover up tin foil. So there we go, the tin foil is now covered. Now we've got our tools. Not gonna do too much on the top section because that's pretty much going to be covered by the oxide paste, so let's work our way around the sides here. You can see instead of this restrictive motion like this, see I tend to take the tool and just drag it along the surface. Make sure it's wet down with water. Move along the surface. Don't worry about these little burrs right here. You can see that. You can sand those off later if you let it set. You can remove those even with your finger. There's any number of ways to get rid of those. You don't have to worry about that. Now you can see how I'm kind of struggling to hang on to this. So there's no refrigerator magnet there. And I just wanted to do that as an example of why I did this. Because instead of worrying about this slipping out of my hands, touching this, here I had it on my nice little pedestal. So I'm going to work with this tool to a certain degree. I'm going to briefly work on this top section here. All the while making sure that I get water in between the tool and the clay. Now what I'm doing here is putting a few stair steps in. So maybe that's a place where the snow can kind of be gathered up. And I think it's just about time for me to unveil this tool. It's a little bit of a finer tool. And see again, instead of doing this, and it's very restrictive and tight, let's hold the tool down on the end and work it this way. And we have to let these set for a little while before we can put our oxide paste on those, which will give us plenty of time to make our Sculpey version. Just going to call that a day. So we've got pair of bases made from epoxy sculpt, and once they're set, then we can put on our oxide paste. So next up we're going to do Sculpey. Now we're ready to carve some Sculpey. We're going to work on a 30mm round base. I'm going to use a relatively thick sheet of Sculpey here. I've just got a few simple carving tools out. There's sort of a beveled edge to it, and this a little more unique tip. If you can see this, it's actually a rounded tip, good for gouging things out. Now these tools are not really sharp. Not like the X-Acto knife. This thing will go into your skin. These, not so much. It's a little bit safer to use. So what we want to do is we need to break off a piece of our Sculpey. A couple of different ways to do it. You could just take your fingers, snap it, or measure this out. So I'm going to go about here. Do a score line like this, finger on either side, and break it along that score line. Or you could do it by hand, either way. Let's break it right there. Now when you break it by hand, it's going to be a little more random. Now I'm used to breaking the Sculpey, but if you want to not be surprised, I suggest scoring it first with the X-Acto and then breaking it. So we're going to set this down. What we have to do is we have to carve some of this away so that there's still some of the base exposed where we can pile up some epoxy sculpt. A couple different ways we can do that. Easiest way, X-Acto knife. Now what I don't want to do is this. The X-Acto knife can go in the thumb. I want my thumb down here. The knife's over here. And I'm not doing this motion, it's press in and lift. So again, I'm lifting away from my hand. I'm not going straight in. I do it over here too. Go in, pull away. Go in here, pull away. Not only is that a little bit safer, but see how we're getting this nice little jagged edge instead of just a round. We don't want a round circle. Now the camera could shake a little bit during this part of the video. That's because this is still pretty aggressive motion, and it just this is a very heavy drafting table. It's really old, really heavy, and even that's not quite enough to keep the camera from shaking, so I apologize for that. So again, this motion is this, and pull away. So I don't want to cut in too much. You can see I'm gradually now See this little shifting motion here? So I'm going to up and down, side to side. So it's putting this texture in, so let's see. So we're almost to the point where we've cleared some spots on the base, where we can pile up some snow. Now this top part here, this depends on what's going to stand on it. Now if we're going to have him stand on top of this, well, we have to stop, because we need to leave a place for his feet to stand. But if this was a smaller image, just something that has maybe just it's on one leg, well then you can do something more like what I did here. And there's plenty of, just say you're doing forest elves and they're running around, they're usually on one foot, so we can get away with smaller pieces like that. What I'm going to do is just again carve this down just enough to leave room for some snow. See, I'm going to cut this down just a little bit. Now this tool, what's this for? You know, see how I'm kind of gouging away. This made these straight lines. This, a little more natural gouge. Now again, most of this might just be covered by snow anyways. I'm still going to try and make some texture here, just for the heck of it, in case I want it to be exposed. It's certainly a lot easier to do that now than once the flex paste is on here. Snip away some of this. Snip away some of that. And I want to subtract slowly, because, well, it's always easier to subtract than to try and add. Okay, so here we go. Nice place there for some snow. Let's maybe dig this out a little bit. Okay. Now what we could also do, if we didn't have to worry about the footprint there, we could actually cut away maybe this piece, make it lower. That's what I did on this base. It's a little bigger, so I had more room to work with. You can say I have this, the taller part of the base, this chopped away, but even here, it's still level enough for something to stand on, either this way or this way. Now, just in the way we added that extra little piece on our bigger epoxy sculpt base, I took a separate chunk of Sculpey and carved that away and added it there. Now here I don't really feel the need to do that, because I'm going to fill this in with our oxide paste. So let's clear away some of our debris here. Glue this thing down. Now, one little hint here, I'd say on these bases there's a gap here. All that would be touching is this to this lip. Now we want to maybe fill that in. What we can do is take the leftover refrigerator magnet, this part here that we probably won't use, and cut this away. And we'll use this is the perfect height. See how that's at? It needs to be a little bit smaller. And it's got some self-stick to it. Put that down. So what it's going to do is fill this in. So when I do this, glue it to here. Now there's something to touch instead of just around the outside. So let's glue this down. See, we've got some overhang there. What if we don't want that? You can always take it away. Always take this away. Same thing here. You can see I'm doing some angled carving just to break up this texture, make sure there's enough difference. You can also use this bevel tool. Now what if we want to smooth this down a little bit? So I'm just taking away a little bit of the burrs. Just smooth that down a little bit, not too much, because we don't have to have some texture. Now if we wanted to, we can still do this. Use this hook tool. Maybe a few deeper fissures in the rock. Maybe even one here, not all four sides, just maybe here and here. And this little crack there. And leave the deepest fissure right there. Again, we'll sweep this away. And now this is going to be ready for the oxide paste. I'm going to set this aside, and we're going to do one last material, unique material, and that's going to be the cork. Get everything in place so that we can do some cork bases. I have both kinds out. The thinner, fine grained, and the thicker, really rough textured. Again, this one, you can see the difference. Refrigerator magnet, filling that in. Nothing here. So you got this lip again. All it's going to glue to is that here. We set this down. Either way, what it's going to do is glue to the refrigerator magnet instead of just floating in air like this one. Now let's say we want to make sure we have enough room for him to stand on, like so. So let's glue this down. And that's down. Again, all we did was snap off a piece. If we had a bigger base, snap off this piece. Have a smaller one next to it. Could even have something like this. Tear off a little bit of the top of this. Put that on a base. Let's set this guy aside, and we'll do this. Now very quickly. Again, some magnet to fill in the gap. Tear off the sheet. Set this down. Now we can glue. I have this one. It's going to have a little overhang to it, I think. So what I'm going to do is pull away some of my fingers. Pull away some of this. Some snow can go here. A place for the miniature to stand. Now let's something back here. A couple of different ways we can go about this. stack it this way and let the snow work its way up. Go like this. You can see that. I'm going to have the snow kind of hang over the edges. Now we've got this. Let's try and go the opposite way, see how that looks. So glue this piece down. And then this chunk right here. I'm just going to see how that looks. And we got some of this overhang. Let's move this back just a little bit. Okay. So we've got our examples here. I also have my dried foliage, and now I could do a massive branch like this. That's a little too big. I could go as small as, say, this. This would probably be a more normal size, but maybe I want to go a little bigger. So let's break this one off. Now this one, I have to pick a place either here or back here. Go right here. And any kind of pointed, a needle, a pin vise. Just going to use this. What I'm going to do is, see this, I'm going to just put kind of a pilot hole in there. And hopefully, I get my glue on here. Put this in, it's not going to break. So there we go. Now, we have our branch. We could enhance this. We could do a second one. Let's try that over here. Put some glue on this. This one's going to be a little bit more dainty. I have to find my hole. Alright, so there we go. I'll let that settle. And now what if I wanted to something like this on here? I could do the same thing. By pilot hole here. I can see that cork. See, this bounced back because this is more dense. So I have to make an even bigger pilot hole. I'm going to use this to kind of maybe help it down into there. There we go. So now that we've got these two items prepared, let's get to our oxide paste. Now I learned the hard way that these containers, they come with a little bit of a surprise. It keeps the material fresh, but also can lead to making a mess. So let's open this up. And this inner liner is great for keeping things fresh, but one thing I learned is that when you pull off this inner liner, you better go really slow with it. As you can see, it gets on the bottom half. First time I opened one of these up, especially when it was really full, popped it open, oxide paste went everywhere. And this stuff, it'll stain your clothes, it'll stain your carpet. So you want to be really careful with it. It's not toxic or anything, but it gets into everything and it just really stays there. So effectively what this is flex paste with sand, and it has a color to it. I think this comes in a few different colors. If you wanted to use white, whatever, it's gonna be painted, so I don't care. That's why I don't mind that it's red. So what I'm gonna do is, I need to get a brush. This is relatively cheap craft brush. Get my water out again. Paper towel here. And start off this. Again, got it on the refrigerator magnet so I can go like so. Take brush full. I just laid it out on the top there. I'm going to use my water, so I'm watering this down. Not too much. As I'm spreading it around. And this is just what we would do with every single base. We're just going to spread this around. Making sure to kind of make a pile on the edges of our rocks, because we want to overhang a little bit. See how this kind of comes down? It's because we've made it a little bit wetter. More oxide paste. Pop it in here. Again, we have to kind of think, well, how would the snow work on this base? How is it going to just cascade down the base? So you can see the water. It lets me work at it a little bit. Now, once you put this water in, it's going to take longer for it to set up. That's the one. Like I said, there's a downside of using the water. That's what it is. It's going to take a little bit longer for this to set up. So I'm going to work some on the back here. Fill in some of this. You can see without the water, see, it just hangs there. Now some of this, see where it goes on this nice angle here? I'm just going to let the powders do the work there. I'm not going to put the oxide pad. The oxide paste is about building up a heavier amount. And trying to build up so that I can pull it down like this. It almost acts like an icicle. See that? Right there. And you can do this as much or as little of this as you want. Just going to put a few more areas on the base. A little gap right there. Take some of this, going to cover that up. When I'm doing the snow bases, I generally don't mind if the snow goes over onto this outer lip of the base. Put a little bit of the oxide paste here. Give that a little more support. Use the water to make it flow. You can also just use your hand to take that away. So you saw the benefit of having this pedestal here to work on. Again, I'm going to do this without the pedestal and see that that's a little bit more difficult. So what I'm going to do is start on the top section here. Smooth that out. Let some of that overhang. Again, it's about building it up and dragging it around. Now this, what if I don't want this entire surface to be covered by something that's the same height? That's definitely more interesting than just having the same amount of snow everywhere, because snow can drift. Here we're going to do this. We're going to pull this down. Going to work some of this. Again, use the water to get control of this. This is very thin right here. When this is painted, you're really not going to see that. What I'm actually trying to do is just mask the seam. And that's why I'm trying to stipple that in and follow that rock texture. So now this part's going to be a little bit thinner. I don't want it to have as much of a snow drift on it. So I'm going to thin it down with water. And then I'm going to fill in this. I'm going to let the snow work its way down here. And use the water to help carry it down. The edge. So I want to let stuff settle a little bit before I try to put the flex paste on these branches yet. Don't want to damage anything. So I'm going to set these aside. I'm going to bring out my Sculpey base. Do the same thing. Here you can sort of see how thin this is. There's virtually going to be no height there. That's okay, because again we're looking to try and build this to different heights. Again, if it starts to catch like that, use the water, push it down. Drag over here. You can also use a thinner brush. See if we can find smaller brush. Again, this is something that I use for my glazes and washes, so it's fairly beat up. Principle's the same, no matter which of the brushes that we use. Pull some of that away, put it here. Again, if that's too much, just take the finger, wipe it away. Let's have some of this snow work its way down here, just like this. A cascade of snow working its way down. Let's build up one last section here, and then we'll leave this alone because we still have two more bases. To do. Alright, and we're going to leave this be. We're going to grab epoxy sculpt base. Now you can see already that's pretty hard. So that's the same thing here. And at this point, if you get too much on there, well, you just wipe it away with the brush. It's no big deal. See, I kind of do this swirling motion, especially with a wet brush. It tends to flatten this down. Let's get a nice batch in there. My small brush. And I'm going to expose this rock and work the snow around it. Making sure that I don't want too many of these ripples in there. Now, sometimes snow can be a little bit like a sand dune. If it's a cold, windy day, sometimes the snow will, it looked like a sand dune, but I really don't want that here. And there's one last area. Again, we've got a magnet on this, which lets me do this. Now the reason why I like to use the bigger brush, like this, these larger areas, is it leaves, if you want this to be smooth, it's just a more efficient way to make that a smooth edge. Nice and rounded. Again, if there's extra, you can always just finger and wipe it away. Okay, got their snow pile up here. And we have one final base, and that is our last epoxy sculpt base. So let's stick some of this out here. Let's get a nice pile underway. And I walk this right up to the edge. Even a little bit more. Because even some more. I know this is kind of off camera a bit. Just had to get that pile down. We're going to take this brush. What I want to try and do is have some of this hang down. Swirl this up, get it towards the edge. So I'm building up an overhang. Building up an overhang, so I'm starting to push it over the edge. And I'm going to start to pull it down. Pull that down. Pull that down. And that's kind of some icicles by default. Now there's a few companies that sell icicles. I know Dragon Forge Designs has icicles that you could hang off of your base. But sometimes I just like to create those myself with the oxide paste. So there we go. I have a whole collection of these all ready. Now, my next little segment is going to be about using the powders and putting the flex paste on your trees. Alright, it's time for us to put some paint on our bases. Now I've got a few colors out here. This is fairly basic. Just got a black, this sort of a medium brown, this olive drab here, which when you mix it with this, and this is United States Marine Corps highlight, these two make a nice gray. These two also make a nice gray, and I got some verdigris for some of the brighter highlights on the rock. Got just a few brushes here. This is one of my filberts. Again, this is a number 4. And just one of the craft brushes here to kind of throw on my initial layers of paint. And in projects like this, I actually sometimes don't use a regular palette. Sometimes I'll use a temporary palette. It's actually a food container. We save lots of these. I'm going to pull one off here. See, this little food container. Why do I use these? Because in this case, see, this makes a nice little water trough around here. Very convenient. And for bases, it tends to get a little bit messy. Sometimes I don't want to use up my palettes on bases. So that's why I just save these food containers, and I use these. Still have a paper towel handy over here. So let's just mix out a few colors here. I'll throw out some of the black. And I'm going to go in a little bit of an arc here, put out some of the brown. Go to the olive drab. Oh, this is the new container. That's why that's all. There we go. This is a new container versus one that I've used. You can see some of the activator wasn't mixed with the paint. This one was. This is a new jar. That doesn't tend to happen with these Panzer colors. It doesn't really happen with the game color either. Got some colors out there that we can use. Let's just throw out some dark colors. Now I've got this water that I can mix into. And I'm going to focus on putting the darker colors, not where the snow is, but where the rocks are. I want to make sure I get this stuff underneath. Got this. See, it's already kind of beat up. Using enough water just to make sure the paint flows. Alright. Not afraid to mix in some of this brown because with all the cool colors that we're going to use, sometimes it's nice to have a little bit of a warm color to offset that. Mix that in. Set this aside. Get into our next base. Again, leaving the snow alone. For now, putting it on the rocks. Here's our larger Sculpey base. We're going to do the same thing. Focus the darkest colors towards the bottom here. Still making sure to mix something that's not just black. It's not just brown. Some of these are actually exposed rocks here, so that's why I'm putting some of the darker color there. Okay, just work our way around this. Like so. Now that's going to need to dry for a little bit. So as this dries, pull these back out again. Now, we've got this color here. This is sort of a bluish gray. It's Templar blue, and one of the Reaper paints. Any similar color would do. There's just probably a dozen different colors very similar to this. You could even just mix it by maybe taking some sky blue, mix it with the black. I'm just going to start out with this. See kind of a grayed down blue. I'm not going to be afraid to actually let it mix with some of the brown. What I'm going to do is paint where the snow is. The reason why I'm doing this is that snow is transparent, or at least translucent, at least semi-translucent. So by letting this all blend together, we're gonna layer this paint up, and it's gonna give us that semi-transparency of the snow. Because to go from super dark to super light, that's not really how it goes. Even the snow, if you look at piles of snow, even they have a shadow area, and that shadow area tends to be bluish. So let's just lay this out. Set that aside. Next base. Same thing. Now if you want to accelerate the drying process of this, you could use a hair dryer if you want. I'm just gonna let this dry naturally, because I also want to show you how to put the flex paste on your trees. So I'm going to do the same thing here again, not be too afraid to let the other colors mix with that grayish blue, the Templar blue. Especially in these recesses here. Now if you feel like you need more of the Templar blue, feel free to put some of that out there. Now here I'm going to leave this a little bit more of a hard edge. Just going to let that kind of sit like so. Alright. So now as this kind of has a chance to sit and do its thing, do something with these trees. Now, you could just leave that brown. But I want to change this up a little bit. What I'm going to do is, actually I'm going to paint the tree a tiny bit. So I went black down towards the bottom, but as I work my way up, it's getting lighter. I'm going to mix in some of this. Got a little lighter color here. So even the tree itself is going to get a little shading. Again, a little darker towards the bottom. Don't want to get this too light. If I get it too light, and that's not going to show up. Okay, I'm going to leave this go. We've got our other tree here I can play around with. Do the same thing. Now a couple things we can do with our bases here. Now it's summer here and it's been really humid, so the paint's not going to dry as fast. Now you could maybe use that to your advantage. I could do this completely with the powders, or I could do it, say you don't have the powders, well, let's do some more with the paint. Now at this stage, I think we've got everything filled in. I'm going to eventually want to go to a softer brush, like my filbert. I'm going to put out some more of the Templar blue. And put a little more of a layer on top, a little bit lighter layer. Same thing over here. And what you're just doing is working your way gradually lighter and lighter. Trying to get not too bright with the blue, because the powders, those will be more than bright enough. And see here, see how I'm scumbling this in, because maybe the snow is a little bit more melted here. This is going to be more of an intact snow pile over here. And over here, so what I can do is, see, I can just blend that together. So it looks like the snow is maybe melting a little bit onto the rocks. And you can see the stroke that I'm using. Set it down, and I'm just drawing it across. I'm not going like this. You can. stipple and scumble. I don't necessarily want to do that. I want to draw it across because all of this paint is all very wet. By just going gently this way, that lets the paint stick. Alright, so I'm going to let these sit for a little while. And draw out some of the flex paste. I'm going to put it on our trees. We've got our flex paste. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull some out. Put it out on the palette. Throw it right there. It's not going to take a whole bunch for this. Got some water. Letting some of that blue mix. Got kind of a little bit of that in with the flex paste. Get it off, some of it off the brush. And what I'm going to do is brush that on. You can see how it's going to clump. Let's see if I can get it right here. See that little clump there? So that's what's going to happen, is you're just dragging this onto the tree. And always have the paper towel handy so you can clear off any excess. So see on this side, it's still, you can still see the darkness of the bark. On this side, tree just has that kind of that wet snow sticking to it. Could do the other side also if we wanted. Again, it's as much or as little as you want. We have our other small tree and do the same thing. Again, this side still has a lot of its original darks. This side, snow. So now these bases, what I can do is I can keep working the paint lighter and lighter. And even do some dry brush some lighter colors on there. So what we may do is let some of this dry, and we'll put on the final dry brushing, final colors of snow, and then do that little trick with the weathering powders to kind of finish everything off. So I'm just putting a few more lighter dabs of color here, especially on this. And the big base. And see how it does this. Maybe I want this. It did just kind of show some variation in the snow. Or I can just have it all cascade down. Maybe leave that a little more snow-free. But you can see I'm starting to pick out where some of the rocks are going to stick through the snow. Maybe some of the snow has melted away. Last but not least, I want to cover using the powders and the realistic water to put the finish on your snow. So I'm going to move the bases aside and open up some of these jars. So I've got the white, got the sea foam, and the blue. Got my another one of those temporary palettes out. I'm going to put some white out on the palette. They'll touch the faded blue and the other blue. And you definitely want to be sure to set those aside, because they will definitely get all over the place. If you tip those over, you will that powder's going to spread all over the place. I know, because I've done it. So, what this lets me do, it lets me have a place to mix my colors together, and that's where the realistic water comes in. Put some of it here, some of it here. What I'm going to do, see this start to mix together. It's almost the consistency of paint. And that's really the nice feature of this. So I'm going to have a few colors mixed together. So I'm going to have some drier mixes, some wetter mixes, but some more of the darker, well, relatively darker colors. And let's put this over our snow. You can see right away, makes a big impact. That's why I said our brighter colors are going to come from the powders. They're very intense. And they're aided also by this realistic water. So let's again start off with our darker. And it seems very bright right now. I know it'll seem darker. I did dry brush a little bit of lighter grays on the stone bits. Figured that it's more important to look at our snow here. You can use your finger to sort of tamp away the edge if you feel like there's too much. So again, I'm still trying to make sure I don't get too much of any one type of color. So here you can see I'm going to save some of that texture there. I'm not going to wipe it all out. I want to keep some of that. And here where the snow kind of cascaded down, do a little more there. But again, I want to preserve texture where possible. We've got some of these overhangs here. Like this one. And don't be afraid to use your finger like I was doing there. And see, I'm just gonna dab a little snow there. So again, 3 different bases, 3 very different looks to your snow. Now maybe you use a slightly finer brush to get into some of these other areas. get all the way down in there with their snow. So there we go. And sometimes you have to work a little bit fast with this because it will set up. Now let's start to work a little bit lighter here. And almost a little bit drier too in some cases. So again, this compared to this, sorry that's off camera. A little bit lighter. Let's make sure we still have some of the green. I'm going to use this base. You can see how we've gotten lighter. And again, not going all the way down. Maybe I'll do a few little hints there. Here, you can tell that I'm focusing most of the wettest material on these outer edges, just like we did on these bases. So that's why this has a little more shine to it. I'm just going to dab at these a little bit. Just a bit more here. I'm going to really build this up. And let that build up. Work that a little bit. And I apologize if this goes off camera a few times. Sometimes just to get at something I need to change the angle. Sometimes that means holding it in a weird place for the camera. I might throw out just some more because we're just about at the end phase. So a little bit more of the realistic water so I can get to pure white here. And just at the very edges, there we go. So again, a base that looked mostly like nothing, all of a sudden looks a whole lot like snow. So I'm going to just do a few bright touches there. Same thing here. Too much excess, I'm just going to pull that off. Might work back the other way with my blue, but you generally get the idea here. And hopefully you learned a lot. I know this is a lot to digest, so I would suggest you maybe just try one type of base and maybe master that and then move on to another one. May depend on what kind of materials are available near you. Hopefully, you enjoyed making your snow bases.
Twist and turn as your candles burn. I am aware of how your soul does yearn. Your lips are black where they're making me lose track. Crossing the point where I can't go back. Your sweet incense is a liquid end, forcing my will now to be rebent. And the lights do gleam as if inside of a dream, here in my mind where it can all be seen. Hey! They try to hide your face, and I am aware of how to find your trace. Subdued and mild as if you're in a child, it's calling you to be free and wild. You game you'll play, you'll dance the night away, laughing as you're gonna stalk your prey. Fancy dress are in your darkest best, well here is the place where you can join the rest. Is where that all your fun gets had. The game you play, you'll dance the night away, laughing as you go to stalk your prey. The fancy dress are in your knocking best, and here's the place where you can join the rest.